Have you ever wondered what happens to families when they receive a significant amount of money? I'm talking about generational wealth. You work your entire life, build something meaningful, accumulate assets, and then what? You want to leave it to your kids, right? But there's this nagging fear in the back of your mind. You know these stories. You've seen it happen with friends, family members, maybe even celebrities. A kid gets money too early, and suddenly they lose all motivation. They make terrible decisions. Relationships fall apart. Money disappears faster than it came. Or worse, they become dependent, unable to function without relying on family wealth. This is the paradox that keeps wealthy parents awake at night. And if you're watching this, chances are you're thinking about your own legacy right now. How do you provide your children with financial security without accidentally creating problems that money can't solve? The truth is, this isn't a new problem. It's existed for centuries. Wealthy families have always struggled with this question. But what's interesting is that families who actually get it right, who manage to pass wealth successfully without destroying their children's drive and character, they follow some pretty specific patterns. And today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what those patterns are. Let me start with something that might sound controversial. The worst thing you can do for your kids is to simply hand them money and hope for the best. I'm not saying don't give them anything. I'm saying that pure financial inheritance without preparation is one of the most dangerous gifts you can give. Think about it logically. If you suddenly had $1 million dropped into your lap at age 25 with no preparation, no understanding of how to manage it, what would you do? Some people handle it fine, but most people, they make mistakes, big ones. And those mistakes become really expensive when we're talking about substantial amounts of money. The reason is simple. Money is like a muscle. If you don't exercise it, if you don't understand how it works, if you haven't learned how to handle it, then having a lot of it is actually really dangerous. It's like giving a Ferrari to someone who just got their driver's license. Sure, they're legally allowed to drive it, but are they prepared? Probably not. So here's where we start. Before we even talk about numbers, before we talk about trusts or inheritance strategies or any of that legal stuff, we need to talk about preparation. Your job as a parent isn't just to accumulate wealth. Your job is to prepare your children to manage wealth. And that's a completely different thing. Let me tell you about something I've observed working with families who have successfully passed down wealth. The ones who get it right, they start teaching their kids about money early. And I mean really early. Not when they're teenagers and suddenly figuring out how to handle a credit card. I'm talking about when they're young enough to understand basic concepts, but still young enough to learn without the stakes being too high. Some of the most successful, wealthy families I know have their kids doing chores and earning money from age 6 or 7. Not because they need the money, obviously they don't, but because they need the experience. They need to understand that money doesn't just appear. It's something you have to work for. It's something that requires effort and decisions. Then, as they get older, these families introduce more complex concepts. They might give their teenager a budget for back-to-school shopping and let them make decisions about how to spend it. Or they might involve their kids in family business decisions. Not full decisions, but they ask their opinions. They let their teenagers see how their parents think about money. They don't hide the financial side of life. Here's something really important that most parents get wrong. They either tell their kids everything about their wealth, or they tell them nothing. And both extremes are problematic. If you tell your kids too much, they might start making life decisions based on the money. Why should I get a job? We're rich. If you tell them nothing, then when the money eventually comes to them, they're completely unprepared. They don't have the mental framework to understand it or manage it. The sweet spot is transparency with purpose. Your kids should know that you have resources. They should understand at an age-appropriate level what that means. But they should also understand that those resources come with responsibility. And crucially, they should understand that the fact that the family has money doesn't mean they get to bypass the normal parts of life that build character and competence. Now, let's talk about something that's really changed in recent years. The rise of the affluenza problem. You know what I'm talking about. These are kids who grow up with money and it becomes their identity. They define themselves by what their parents have rather than what they've accomplished. They don't develop skills. They don't build resilience. They don't learn how to handle failure because failure has always been cushioned by money. This is heartbreaking because it's so preventable. And the way you prevent it is by making sure that your children's daily lives don't revolve around money. This might sound strange coming from me, someone who makes videos about wealth and capital, but it's true. The healthiest wealthy families I know, their kids don't think about money that much. They think about school, about friends, about their interests, about their goals. Money is just a tool that's available to them, not the focus of their existence. This means some practical things. It might mean your kids go to public school instead of private school. It might mean they take public transportation sometimes instead of being driven everywhere. It might mean they work a job in high school or college, not because they need the money, but because they need the experience of working. It might mean you don't buy them a luxury car for their 16th birthday. I know that sounds harsh, but there's actually research on this. Kids who have to work for things, who have to earn things, who have to make choices about resources, they develop an entirely different relationship with money than kids who are just given everything. Let me tell you about a family I know. They're very wealthy, multiple generations of wealth, significant assets. But they made a decision that their kids would work during summers starting at age 15. Real jobs, not intern positions that their parents arranged, actual jobs where they had to apply, interview, and perform like everyone else. And you know what happened? Those kids understood the value of money in a way that money alone could never have taught them. They made smarter decisions. They were more thoughtful about spending. And here's the key part. When they eventually inherited wealth, they didn't view it as, now I can stop working. They viewed it as, now I have more resources to do the things I actually want to do. This brings me to an important question that every wealthy parent needs to answer. What are you actually trying to accomplish with your wealth transfer? Are you trying to make sure your kids are comfortable? That's one thing. Are you trying to set them up so they never have to work? That's completely different. Are you trying to pass on not just money, but also values and a way of thinking about the world? That's something else entirely. The families that get this right, they know the answer to that question, and they structure everything around that answer. They don't just default to, I'll give them money. They actually think about what outcome they're trying to create. Let's get into the practical side of things now. Let's say you've done the work. You've prepared your children. They understand money. They have good judgment. They have their own accomplishments and identity beyond your wealth. Now, how do you actually transfer the wealth in a way that makes sense? First, there's something called the financial health check. This is something you should do with your kids before any major transfer happens. And this applies whether your kids are in their 20s or their 40s. You need to understand their financial situation. Do they have debt? Credit card debt? Student loans? Mortgages? Do they have emergency savings? Do they have a plan for retirement? Do they understand their own spending habits? This information is crucial because it tells you a lot about how they'll handle inherited money. I'll give you an example. Let's say your son or daughter is 30 years old and they have $20,000 in credit card debt. Now you might be thinking, I have plenty of money, I'll just pay that off for them. But should you? Maybe not. Because if you just pay off the debt without them understanding how they got into it, they'll probably end up in the same situation again. The money might solve the immediate problem, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem, which is their behavior around money. This is one of the key insights about wealth transfer. Money alone doesn't fix problems. It just makes problems more expensive. If your child has a spending problem, giving them more money doesn't solve the spending problem. It just gives them more money to spend. If your child doesn't understand how to invest, giving them a large inheritance doesn't suddenly make them a good investor. It just gives them a large amount of money to invest badly. So before any transfer happens, you need to have honest conversations. What are your kids' financial goals? Do they want to buy a house? Do they want to start a business? Do they want to retire early? Do they want to travel? Once you understand their goals, you can actually structure your wealth transfer to support those goals specifically, rather than just moving money around. Here's where a lot of wealthy parents make a strategic mistake. They don't use their wealth transfer as a teaching tool, but it absolutely can be. Let me explain what I mean. Let's say you have $1 million you want to leave to your kids. Instead of just saying, I'm going to put this in a trust and you'll get it when I die, what if you actually involve them in the process? What if you said something like, I'm going to give you access to some of this wealth now, while I'm still alive, and we'll see how you handle it. We'll check in. We'll discuss your decisions, and based on how you manage it, we'll figure out the best way to structure the rest of the inheritance. Now you're not just giving money away. You're actually having an educational experience. Your kids are learning by doing, with real money, while you're still around to guide them. Some of the smartest families I know actually do this. They'll give their adult child $100,000, with the understanding that they're going to discuss what the child does with it. Not in a controlling way, but in a mentoring way. Maybe the child invests it. Maybe they use it to start a business. Maybe they pay off debt. Whatever they do, they learn something. And the parent learns something too, about whether this child is actually ready for more responsibility. Now let's talk about the legal structure of wealth transfer. This is where it gets a bit more complicated, but I'm going to try to keep it simple. There are basically 3 main ways to transfer wealth. There's direct gifting, where you literally just give money to your kids. There's trusts, where money is held in a legal structure and distributed according to your specifications. And there's the use of entities like LLCs or corporations to hold assets. Direct gifting is the simplest approach, but it also gives you the least control. You give the money, and it's their money. They can do whatever they want with it. For most people, this works fine, especially if you've done the preparation work we talked about earlier. But if you're concerned about whether your kids are ready, or if you have a lot of money, or if you want to ensure that the money is used in a specific way, then direct gifting might not be the best option. Trusts are more complex, but they give you a lot more control. With a trust, you can specify exactly when and how the money gets distributed. You can say things like, my child gets access to this money at age 30, and then another amount at age 40. You can also use trusts to protect money from creditors, from ex-spouses, from poor decisions. And here's something important. Trusts can actually be tools for teaching responsibility. Some families set up trusts where the child has to demonstrate certain behaviors or achievements to access the full amount. I knew a family that set up a trust with their wealthy heir that said something like, you get access to a portion of this at age 25 if you have a college degree or equivalent experience. You get another portion at 30 if you've worked for a certain number of years. You get the bulk of it at 40 if you've shown responsible financial management. Was this controlling? Sure, in a way, but it was also incredibly effective. It gave the heir a roadmap. It created incentives for the kinds of behavior and achievements that would lead to a good life. And importantly, it meant that when the heir finally got access to the bulk of the money, they were prepared. Entities like LLCs or corporations can be useful if you have complex assets, if you want to keep family assets separate, or if you're running a family business. But for most people, they're probably not necessary for simple wealth transfer. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. When you're doing wealth transfer, you actually want to involve professional help. I know. You might think you can handle this on your own, but the truth is, there are a lot of details, tax implications, legal implications, creditor protection. These are real, and they can cost you a lot of money if you get them wrong. A good estate planning attorney and a good financial advisor can save you an enormous amount of money and prevent a lot of problems. But here's the thing. You need to make sure these professionals actually understand your values and your goals, not just the legal and financial mechanics. Because you can structure wealth transfer in a way that's perfectly legal and tax efficient, but completely misses what you actually want to accomplish. Let me talk about something really important that a lot of wealthy parents don't want to talk about. What happens if your kid makes terrible decisions with the money? What if you give them access to $1 million and they blow it in 5 years? What if they invest it badly? What if they use it in a way that's completely contrary to your values? First, you have to accept that this might happen. You cannot control your adult children's behavior. You can influence it. You can structure things to make bad decisions harder. But you cannot prevent them from making choices you disagree with. Some wealthy parents struggle with this a lot. They want to give their kids freedom and responsibility, but they also want to make sure the money is used right. And those two things are in tension. The answer, I think, is to let it go. Once the money is truly theirs, it's theirs. They get to make decisions about it. And yes, sometimes those decisions will be mistakes. But that's part of learning. And here's the thing. If you've done the preparation work right, the mistakes won't be as big. Your kids will have the judgment to make mostly good decisions most of the time. They won't blow $1 million in 5 years because they'll understand the concept of financial runway. They'll understand that money that's gone is gone. They'll have the values you've tried to instill. And if they do make mistakes, well, that's actually okay. That's how people learn. It's painful, but it's necessary. Now, let's talk about something that's probably affecting you if you're watching this. Guilt. A lot of wealthy parents feel guilty about their wealth. They feel guilty about having more than other people. They feel guilty about wanting to pass it on. They feel guilty that their kids might not have the same drive or character because life has been easier for them. Let me be direct. You don't need to feel guilty about being successful. You did something right. You made good decisions, or you were lucky, or probably both. You built something. You accumulated resources. That's not something to feel guilty about, but it is something to be thoughtful about. The way to work through that guilt is not to punish your kids by not giving them anything, and it's not to overcompensate by giving them everything. The way to work through it is to be intentional. Be purposeful. Make sure that whatever you pass on actually serves your kids' lives and your family's values. And make sure they understand both the privilege they have and the responsibility that comes with it. Here's something I think about a lot. Wealth is generational. The money you have today is the result of decisions and work that went back generations. And the money you pass on will shape the decisions your kids and grandkids make for generations. That's a big responsibility. But it's also an opportunity. You get to decide whether wealth becomes something that builds character and opportunity, or something that destroys drive and character. And that decision is made long before the money changes hands. Let me talk about some of the specific mistakes I've seen wealthy families make. The first one is assuming their kids understand money because they've been exposed to wealth. They haven't. Exposure to wealth is not the same as understanding wealth. Your kid can grow up in a nice house, go to good schools, travel, and still not understand how money works or how to manage it. In fact, sometimes growing up with money without understanding it is worse than growing up without money, because you don't develop the basic skills. The second mistake is treating all kids the same. If you have multiple children, they might have very different financial situations, different maturity levels, different abilities to manage money. Some parents just divide everything equally out of a sense of fairness. But sometimes fairness isn't equal. Sometimes fairness means giving more to the kid who's struggling, or giving less to the kid who doesn't need it, or structuring things differently for each child based on their actual situation. It's more complicated, but it's often better. The third mistake is not updating your plan. Life changes. Your kids change. Your circumstances change. Your will or trust might have been perfect when you wrote it 20 years ago, but circumstances are different now. You should review and update your plan regularly. This doesn't mean completely redoing it every year, but it does mean checking in every few years to make sure everything still makes sense. The fourth mistake is not talking about your plan with your kids. A lot of parents keep their financial situation a complete secret and then are surprised when their kids don't handle the inheritance well. Your kids should know generally what to expect. They don't need to know exact numbers, but they should know that they're going to inherit something and that they should be prepared for that responsibility. The fifth mistake is not considering the psychological impact. Money is emotional. Inheritance is emotional. The death of a parent is emotional. And a lot of families experience conflict around inheritance not because of the money itself, but because of the emotional dynamics. One kid feels like they're getting less. Another kid feels resentful that they have to wait. Another kid is grieving and not thinking clearly. If you can anticipate these dynamics and address them before they become problems, that's huge. Now, let me talk about what to do if you're reading this and you're not wealthy yet, but you're working toward it. First, don't wait until you're rich to start thinking about this stuff. Start teaching your kids about money now. Start having conversations about what wealth means and how it should be used. Start thinking about your values. What do you want money to do in your family? What role should it play? These are conversations to be having continuously, not just when you're transferring assets. Second, start building good financial habits in your kids now. The habits they develop young are the habits that will be in place when they have access to your wealth. If your kid is 12 and they're already terrible with money, that doesn't fix itself when they turn 25 and inherit wealth. It gets worse. Third, if you're on your way to building wealth, understand that you're not just building money, you're building a legacy. And you're building it right now with every conversation, every decision, every example you set. That's more important than the actual numbers you end up with. Let me tell you about something that I think is overlooked in the wealth transfer conversation. It's the question of meaning and purpose. Here's what I've noticed. The wealthy families that are the most satisfied with their wealth transfer, the ones whose kids actually thrive and do well, they're not just transferring money. They're transferring a sense of purpose. Maybe the family has always been involved in philanthropy, and they pass that on. Maybe the family has a business, and they pass down the entrepreneurial spirit along with the business. Maybe the family has certain values about education or community or taking care of people, and they pass those on. The money is important, obviously, but the meaning behind the money is what actually determines whether the transfer is successful. I knew one family that had sold their company for tens of millions of dollars, and they structured their wealth transfer around values, not just money. The kids knew that the family had always believed in education, in trying to improve the world, in taking risks. So when they inherited, they weren't just given money. They were given money with the context of, this is what our family has always believed in, and this is how we've always used our resources. And you know what? The kids actually used the money well. They started businesses. They got educated. They did philanthropic work. They were actually fulfilling the family values, not violating them. Here's something practical. Write down your values. What do you actually believe in? What matters to you? What do you want your kids to care about? Once you've written that down, everything else gets easier. Your plan for wealth transfer should reflect your values. If you value education, maybe you make education something that's rewarded in your wealth transfer. If you value hard work, maybe you structure things so that your kids have to earn some of the money. If you value giving back, maybe you require your kids to do charitable work. Whatever your values are, your wealth transfer should reinforce them. Now, let's get real about something. There's a certain amount of wealth where the dynamics change. If we're talking about transferring $100,000, that's great, but it's not going to change someone's life trajectory. If we're talking about transferring $1 million, or $10 million, or $100 million, now we're talking about something that could fundamentally change someone's life, their incentives, their motivations. The bigger the transfer, the more careful you need to be. There's actually research on this. There's something called the threshold effect with inherited wealth. Below a certain threshold, inheritance gives you a boost but doesn't fundamentally change your life trajectory. Above that threshold, it does. And once you cross that threshold, normal motivations change. Why would you work if you don't have to? Why would you push yourself if you're already comfortable? Why would you take risks if you don't need to? The answer, if you want your kids to continue developing and growing, is to make sure they understand that the money is a tool, not a replacement for those normal motivations. This might mean not giving all the money at once. It might mean giving it over time after certain milestones. It might mean keeping some of the money in a structure where they have to demonstrate responsibility to access more of it. I'm going to tell you something that might be uncomfortable. If your kid is a drug addict, or if they have a serious mental health issue, or if they're in an abusive relationship, giving them a large inheritance might actually make those problems worse. Addiction is worse when someone has unlimited resources. Mental health issues don't get solved by money. Abusive relationships become more complicated when there's money involved. So before you transfer wealth, you actually need to think about what's going on in your kids' lives. Are they in a place where they can handle this? If they're not, what needs to happen first? Sometimes the most loving thing a wealthy parent can do is say, I'm going to help you get into treatment before I give you this money. Or, I'm going to help you get out of this relationship before we do this transfer. That's harder than just giving money, but it's actually more generous because it's solving the real problem instead of just masking it. Let me talk about the practical timeline. When should you have these conversations? When should you start the transfer? Here's what I think makes sense. Start talking about values and money with your kids when they're young. Start involving them in basic financial decisions in childhood. As they become teenagers, start sharing more information and involving them in family financial discussions. By the time they're adults, they should know generally what to expect. By the time they're in their 30s or 40s, if you're going to transfer wealth while you're alive, that's when you start the actual process. Why transfer while you're alive? There are a lot of reasons. Tax reasons, for sure, but also practical reasons. You get to see how they handle it. You can adjust if needed. You can mentor them. You can have conversations about it. And honestly, it can be incredibly fulfilling to see your kids use the resources you've built successfully. Don't underestimate that. A lot of wealthy people say that giving money to their kids while they're alive and seeing their kids use it well is one of the most satisfying things they've done. Here's something nobody talks about. Conflict happens. Siblings fight. Someone feels like they got less than someone else. Someone feels like they had to work harder because they knew about the money. These conflicts are normal and human. The way you handle them is what matters. If you can acknowledge that these feelings are real, that they're valid, and that you've tried to be fair even if fairness is complicated, then you can work through it. If you try to pretend that everything is fair and there are no hurt feelings, resentment will build up. Also, communication is everything. The more you talk about the plan, the more you explain your thinking, the more your kids understand what you're trying to accomplish, the less likely they are to be upset by the actual transfer. Surprises are bad. Clarity is good. Let me tell you about a framework that I think works really well for thinking about wealth transfer. It's called Wealth with Wisdom. The idea is that wealth without wisdom is dangerous, but wisdom without wealth is limiting. What you're trying to do is pass on both. You're trying to give your kids the resources to do things, but also the judgment to do the right things with those resources. Wisdom comes from experience, from mentoring, from conversations, from seeing how decisions play out. It doesn't come from a will. It doesn't come from a trust document. It comes from relationship. So if you're serious about preparing your kids for inheritance, you've got to invest in relationship. You've got to have conversations. You've got to be vulnerable sometimes. You've got to admit your mistakes. That's where wisdom gets passed on. Okay, let me wrap this up with the most important thing. The single most important thing you can do for your kids around wealth transfer is to be intentional. Don't just default to what you think you should do. Don't just copy what other wealthy families do. Think about what you actually want to accomplish. Think about your values. Think about your kids' actual situations and needs, and then make a plan based on that. And then, maybe most importantly, commit to ongoing conversations about it. This isn't something you figure out once and then never think about again. This is something you think about and discuss and adjust over time as circumstances change. The families that get this right, they're the ones who are intentional and communicative about it. You've worked hard to build your wealth. You deserve to pass it on in a way that actually works. Your kids deserve to inherit not just money, but also wisdom, values, and the ability to use those resources well. That's the real legacy, not the numbers in the account. But what your kids do with their lives and their resources, that's what you're actually passing on. Make it count. That was your friend Clarence Capital. Don't forget, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Check out the next video how I tripled my net worth just by changing my coordinates. Take care of yourself, your finances, and most importantly, your time. Good luck.